Hello and welcome back to St. Thomas Aquinas for everyone. I'm Dave Palmer, and we are in part 4, the final part of man's last end. Now remember, we're in the second part of 5 parts of the Summa, and you may say, well, why did Thomas put the last end so early in the Summa? It seems like we should be working towards the last end, and it should be at the very end where we finally get our reward and what it means to be happy. Well, Thomas orders the Summa very specifically. Remember, he first starts off with God, and then angels, and then human beings, and now we're talking about the last end. It's the same reason as if you were going to, let's say, go to the grocery store. The end is in your mind at the beginning, right? You don't kind of get in your car and start driving around and then think, oh, I think I'll go to the store. No, you already have the end in mind before you get in the car, because that means that you have the direction of where you want to go, and then every step along the way makes sense because you know where you're going, right? So that's what Thomas is thinking here, is he says, I'm going to show you what the end is, and then we're going to use the next 2 sections of the Summa, and even the third part in the supplement, talking about how we get to our end. Okay, this one here is a little more complicated than the last one, but you can do it, okay? I know you can. We're now talking about human acts and the voluntariness, okay? How much control do we have over the acts that we do? And Thomas says in the first part of part 2, remember, Prima Secunda, we're in question 6, article 1, whether anything is voluntary in human acts. So let's just take a look at this picture here. It appears that there are 2 guys helping a homeless man. Were they just programmed to do that, or was this something that they made a decision that they wanted to do? Okay, that's what we're talking about. Okay, was there a voluntariness that was related to this act that they did, which on the surface seems like it's a good thing for them to do, right? All right, here's Thomas's explanation. There must needs be something voluntary in human acts. All right, in order to make this clear, we must take note that the principle of some acts or movements is within the agent, or that which is moved, whereas the principle of some movements or acts is outside. Now you got to understand that as Thomas starts talking about these intrinsic and extrinsic principles of movements, we are talking about providence. We are talking about free will, and we are talking about teleology. Remember that? God moving us towards our end, providence, free will, predestination even. These are big themes that show up in the Summa, and you got to understand these concepts as we talk about even things like stones and rocks, which he's going to get to here in just a second. Okay, whereas the principle of some movements or acts is outside. For when a stone is moved upwards, the principle of this movement is outside the stone. Okay, let me show you a picture here. Here's a cliff. Here's some stones falling off the cliff, or some rocks, or boulders, or whatever you want to call them. Okay, nobody's going to look at that and say, well, that is so unusual that those stones are falling off that cliff. No, it's very, very natural. That's what they do, right? Because of gravity and because of the way the stone's nature is, it always wants to find the lowest place, because that's just what stones do, right? But if you saw a stone going upwards, you would think, that's kind of unusual, isn't it? Okay, so whereas when it is moved downward, the principle of this movement in the stone is in the stone. Okay, so the stone, through its nature, possesses the quality of moving downward. Just like a flame, fire always goes upwards. You ever notice that? Fire, you never see fire going down, it goes up. That's in its nature, to always go up. Stones are exact opposite. They always go down, all right? Now, of those things that are moved by an intrinsic principle, some move themselves, some not. For since every agent or thing moved acts or is moved for an end, those are perfectly moved by an intrinsic principle, whose intrinsic principle is one not only of movement, but of movement for an end. Let me show you another picture. You may have heard, like when you get these severe storms in an area, you see these pictures that are just amazing sometimes, of like a tractor trailer being lifted up by a tornado. Have you ever seen these? The picture's not that clear, but look at it and you'll see that it's a tractor trailer that's actually up in the sky. Everybody would say that's unnatural. Tractor trailers don't get lifted up into the sky. It's an extrinsic principle that's doing that. It's not within the tractor trailer. That's not in its nature, because its nature is to stay at the lowest point possible, right? So this is what we're talking about, intrinsic and extrinsic principles. and towards an end. Everything is moved towards an end. A flower, a dog, a cat, a porpoise, a human being, an angel, right, is moved towards an end. Okay, now in order for a thing to be done for an end, some knowledge of the end is necessary. Therefore, whatever so acts or is moved by an intrinsic principle, that it has some knowledge of the end, has within itself the principle of its act, so that it not only acts, but acts for an end. This is how we're different than your pet goldfish, or your pet dog, or your pet snake. They are being moved to an end by an extrinsic principle, God. We are being moved to an end by an extrinsic principle, but we also have an element of free will as well. Okay, so does that make sense? Okay, whether theologians should take note of circumstances of human acts. Question 7, Article 2. Here's a picture of a woman, and she is, let's just say she's walking into Planned Parenthood. Somebody may say, oh, she's sinning because she's walking into a Planned Parenthood, she's going to get an abortion, she's going to kill her child, right? Not so fast. Thomas is saying here, we have to know the circumstances. We have to know why she's walking in there. There's a lot of reasons she could be walking in there. It may not be to get an abortion, okay? It could be going in there to pray. It could be going there, what have you, okay? This is what Thomas is getting at here. So he says, circumstances come under the consideration of a theologian for a threefold reason. First, because the theologian considers human acts inasmuch as man is thereby directed to happiness. Remember, we all want to be happy. That's the one thing we all have in common, and that's what drives us to eat that banana split, or to go out for a jog, or to get a job, or to raise a family, right? We want to be happy, and we also want to, give other people happiness as well. That's one of the natures of happiness. Now, everything that is directed to an end should be proportionate to that end, but acts are made proportionate to an end by means of a certain commensurateness. Isn't that a great word? So we eat food in order to be happy, right? But there's a certain commensurateness, meaning a certain balance, a certain order, right? So we know that in somebody is eating like this guy is eating, that's out of order. So therefore, that eating is no longer really geared towards our happiness. It's inordinate. And we're going to get into a lot of these virtues and principles and things like that as we move on through this second part of the Summa, part 1 and part 2 of the second part, okay? Okay, which results from due circumstances. Hence, the theologian has to consider the circumstances. Secondly, because the theologian considers human acts according as they are found to be good or evil, better or worse, and this diversity depends on circumstances. If I said somebody killed somebody, was that good or evil? Well, we don't know. We don't know if it was self-defense. We don't know if it was in war. We don't know if it was just in cold blood. We have to know the circumstances. That's what Thomas is getting at. This is actually pretty easy, isn't it? This isn't a very challenging lesson, hopefully not. Thirdly, because the theologian considers human acts under the aspect of merit and demerit, all right? This is a very, very hot button word in theology, is merit, okay? Especially when it comes to, can we merit anything from God? We're going to get to that, and Thomas's answer may surprise you a little bit when we do get to that. Okay, which is proper to human acts. And for this, it is requisite that they be voluntary. You can't merit something if you had to do it, right? Now, a human act is deemed to be voluntary or involuntary according to the knowledge or ignorance of circumstances. Therefore, the theologian has to consider circumstances. Very important. That's why we really can't judge many people and their actions, right? We can judge them objectively. We can judge the action, but we don't know the circumstances of what's going on. Even Thomas, that sounds like a new happy clappy, warm fuzzy feeling of 21st century. Thomas is writing this back in the 13th century. Okay, finally, whether every human action is good or are there some evil actions? All right, this guy, pardon me, appears to be stealing a car. Objectively speaking, if that's what he's doing, that's an evil action, right? Or is it? Well, we'll see. There's a guy helping a friend across the finish line of a race because the guy, hurt himself. That seems to be a good action. Here's, again, those two guys helping the homeless guy. Objectively speaking, it's a good action. All right, now, I'm going to warn you, this answer by Thomas is complicated. It's one of the more complicated things that we're going to study here in the Summa, but I want to go through it kind of slowly, and there's not that much here. It's kind of a short paragraph, okay? But just kind of soak this up and enjoy this, because this is classic Thomism, okay? This is like Thomas at his best. Now in things, each one has so much good as it has being, since good and being are convertible. Okay, that came earlier in the Summa. Being and good. Anything that is good. Do you remember that lesson? But since this same fullness of being is of the very essence of good, if a thing be lacking in its due fullness of being, it is not said to be good simply, but in a certain respect, inasmuch as it is a being, although it can be called a being simply, and a non-being in a certain respect. All right? Are you getting that? Okay, I know it's deep. It's deep. He's saying that being and goodness are synonymous. Anything that is good. Otherwise, God wouldn't have created it, right? But he's saying some things may lack the fullness of being, and that's where evil comes in, right? Okay, we must therefore say that in every action has goodness, insofar as it has being. Whereas if it is lacking in goodness, insofar as it is lacking in something that is due to its fullness of being, and thus it is said to be evil. Okay, the guy stealing the car, that's an action. It has being, but it's lacking the fullness of being because the action is not absolutely good. Therefore, it's lacking in the fullness of being. Isn't it? I just find that interesting. Okay, for instance, if it lacks the quantity determined by reason or in due place or something of a kind. That guy I showed you a moment ago eating all the food and the 4 hamburgers, that was lacking in being, therefore lacking in goodness, therefore it could be an evil action, all things considered in the circumstances. Okay, that brings us to an end of part 4 and the final video in teaching on the last end. We're going to go into another topic next. But we are zooming through the Summa. Okay, we are well into this first part of the second part of the Summa. I hope you're enjoying it. Write your questions, your comments. Let's get a discussion going. And thank you so much for continuing to watch these. You know, in 1 year, you can study the entire Summa. Isn't that just an amazing thing to think of? All right, thanks so much. This is Dave Palmer, St. Thomas Aquinas for everyone. God bless you.